Okay, we might make a start. Welcome, everybody. My name is Lisa Hasker, CEO of Vic Sport. Thank you for taking the time to jump into our second governance workshop series, all about risk management today. Very topical, considering what you're all covering. Great to see some familiar faces online. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting and pay my respects to elders past and present. We're going to make this session interactive, so I'll remind you again a bit later, but through the session, if you've got some questions or points that you want to raise, can you please pop them in the chat, and we'll try to include those as we go along rather than waiting for them all at the end, but we can certainly cover off on questions at the end as well. This session is supported by Sport and Rec Victoria. It is part of a series of governance workshops to support CEOs and board members and senior managers in sport across Victoria. So watch out for the next couple of sessions, which will be around board policies and procedures and integrity and diversity inclusion in governance. But today we're focused on risk management, crucial part of what we all do. There'll be a lot of information today. The recording of the session and also the PowerPoint will be available to you afterwards. So feel free to take notes and obviously pop questions in the chat, but also you will get the information afterwards. There'll probably be a bit more detail on the slides compared to the conversations. You have a chance to look at that afterwards. Today's session is brought to us by SIGPA, and our presenters will be Darren James and Iain Roy. Darren's a risk, crisis, compliance and insurance professional handling all the hard stuff. Darren, with 20 years global experience in senior risk, crisis management and crisis roles across sport, infrastructure, civil construction, renewable energy, finance and insurance sectors, so covering everything. Darren was the inaugural head of risk at Cricket Australia and now heads his own consultancy, MD Risk and Crisis Solutions. So working alongside Darren today from SIGPA is Iain Roy. Iain is CEO of Sport Integrity Governance Partners, SIGPA. He was the founding head of Integrity at Cricket Australia and personally investigated Sandpaper Gate, Iain. So we might hear a bit about that today maybe, in South Africa, which is obviously known to all of us. Iain now works with a range of sport and government clients on a range of sport integrity, governance and risk management matters. He has a particular interest in improving the capability of sport organisations. So we're obviously very aligned there. As I said, after the presentation, we'll have a chance for questions. But if you've got some burning questions through the course of the presentation, please pop them in the chat and we'll endeavour to jump in and out of those at spaces in the presentation. We want to make this as interactive as possible, but I now will hand over to Iain Roy. Thank you, Iain.
Thank you, Lisa. Making it as interactive as possible might be a very large risk that Darren and I are subjecting ourselves to. So we do welcome your questions and observations as we go through this session today. Thank you, Lisa, Anthony, Vic Sport, for having us. It's a privilege to be part of this governance workshop series. You've heard a little bit from us, but before I dive in, I just want to follow Lisa by acknowledging that the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have a lovely set of mugshots here for Darren and for me. I don't need to go into our personal details in much greater detail other than to say that SIGPA is, as Lisa suggested, in the sports integrity and governance space. We do quite a bit of risk management work, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. But we have 15 consultants who we make available for work across sports integrity and sports governance related matters. Why SIGPA to present this today? Well, just by way of a bit of background for what Darren and I have done in the risk management space in the last few years. Principally, I think we can hang our hat on the work that we've done with the Australian Sports Commission over the last handful of years, particularly working with their governance and organisational enhancement team to develop what has become a standard set of risk management documents across NSO land. So that is those documents are shared out with NSOs as required as they see fit to introduce new risk management documentation into their risk management systems. As part of that, we also trained the trainer, which means we worked with the individual consultants within the GOET at the ASC to help them understand those documents, as well as give them some tools to go out and do some advisory work with NSOs to help them build their risk management capabilities. The other thing that perhaps DJ and I are very proud of is the critical incident or crisis management program that we started with the AIS 5 years ago. We've now trained over 30 NSOs on critical incident methodology and put them through a range of simulated critical incidents. That has been well received. That particular program was an award-winning program at the AIS in 2021 or 2022. So critical incident management, as you'll hear from DJ and me over the course of our presentation this morning, is the flip side of risk management. What happens when risks crystallise? So equally important to reflect on how critical incident management sits within your risk management program. A couple of other things we've done with the ASC on top of those broader projects. We've done some specific projects for the ASC, including doing a standardised set of travel risk management guidelines for NSOs to use. That particularly applied before the Tokyo Olympics. Anthony, I'm not sure if I just froze briefly there. Thumbs up if I'm still okay.
No, you're coming through clearly. Thanks, Iain.
I'm just having the circle of death spinning on my screen, so I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, yep, it's okay.
The other thing that we did do with the ASC was created some return to play guidelines that NSOs could introduce both at the NSO level, but also through state sporting associations to help guide how sports should resume competition after COVID lockdowns subsided. We work directly with NSOs on risk reviews and risk management program development. We've done some work with SSAs in other states, in fact, as well. But one of the things that we've started to do more recently is work with Anthony and Lisa, providing some risk management consulting support for SSAs in Victoria through the TMA program. So that's something we're honoured to be a part of, Anthony. So thank you for those opportunities there too. So that probably hopefully explains the why and gives some form of credibility to the presentation that DJ and I will deliver today. Where are we going to go with this presentation? Well, we've broken it into 3 sections. We'll start by giving an introduction to risk management, what it is and why it's important for you as either members of boards or committees or as executive leaders within sport. We'll take that theoretical introduction, if you like, and turn it into a more practical look at what sort of tools you might use within your organisations for delivering on risk management. And then as our final section, we will bring it back to what this all means for members of boards, committees, and also for executive team members too. But to start us off with the first section, I'm going to hand over to DJ to talk about risk management as a general introduction.
Thanks, Iain. In terms of risk management, it's fair to say that sports and NSOs, state sporting associations, local associations and clubs can be exposed to a variety of risks. Some of these risks are of the sport's own doing, and some will come about from the environment that the sport operates within. Some risks involve questionable conduct of people closely connected with the sport, be it athletes or team support staff, high performance staff, etc. And some risks come about due to blind spots in the way a sport is run. Equally, some risks can come around as a result of people, entrepreneurs, etc., sensing an opportunity for growth or riches that the sport itself may have chosen to ignore or do nothing about. At the end of the day, look, risks come in a variety of shapes and sizes and from a variety of sources. And some of these risks, if they materialise, can shake a sport, club or association to its core, but others are just a bump in the road and part of the BAU of operating in the sporting landscape, so to speak. As Iain's mentioned, today is about giving you guys a sense of what your organisation can do or can consider doing in order to stay ahead of the game as far as risk management is concerned. So what is risk? Risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. It's a useful definition in that it helps us to explain why risk is important from a governance perspective. From a board perspective, from a committee perspective, risk needs to be understood and considered in the context of decision making, so that the organisation is able to achieve its objectives, to live true to its purpose within an acceptable degree of certainty. I think one of the things that we need to reflect on is that we're generally pretty good at quantifying and articulating potential upside, but risk is about us being able to effectively quantify and articulate the downside so that we can forge ahead and seek growth and progress, but do so with a clear view and understanding of what's at stake if it all goes wrong. Risk isn't a bad thing. It's not necessarily a negative. And in fact, we need to take risk in order to grow and progress. And it arises because we don't know what the future holds, and therefore the outcomes of decisions that we make and decisions that we take are always uncertain to some extent, and that's where risk lives. I think in order for us to effectively deal with risk and effectively manage risk, it's really important for us to be able to effectively articulate risk. So the way in which we articulate risk is by focusing in on three things. It's by focusing in on a cause that may lead to a risk event that may result in a specific consequence. As an example of that, we use the word due to, or the words due to something happening. There may be a risk event resulting in a particular consequence. The example we have here is to do with participation, and the risk event has been described as a decline in youth participation in sport. So using the cause, risk, event, consequence model, we would define or describe this risk as due to a rise in the popularity of esports, there may be a decline in youth participation in organised sport, which results in a declining fan base, a compromised talent pool for elite talent pathways, or a loss of club, SSO, NSO member/affiliation related revenues. So you can see the logical progression of due to this trigger or cause occurring, there may be a risk event which results in a particular consequence. It's probably worth pointing out here, using this model, there can be a number of different causes that relate to the one risk event, and equally a number of different consequences that can hang off that one risk event, as shown in the graphic there. Perhaps another example will help to drive this home, and this example looks at integrity space, whereby we say, due to ineffective integrity education or ineffective integrity reporting avenues or ineffective screening of personnel, there may be a breach of the integrity code by a particular sport participant, resulting in reputational or brand damage, individual sanctions, or loss of funding from government and commercial partners. So again, when you articulate risk, it's really important, if you can, that you get the causes right, you get the risk event really punchy, and that you're able to articulate clearly what the consequences are, because that helps you to define, or better define, your risk treatments, controls, and mitigation strategies at the back end of the process. Some of the common risks that we've found exist across NSOs and SSAs are reflected on this slide. All sports are fighting a battle to increase participation, get people involved in their sport. Revenue is a key issue for a lot of sports. The sustainability of revenue, where's the next dollar coming from? How do we fund our programs, etc.? Customer and participant data is a big one, especially in recent times where sports are looking to connect and engage more with their participants and fan base. Safeguarding children needs say no more. Medico-legal issues are important, especially in the context of concussion for some of the football codes and some other sports as well. Participant injury, event management, facilities and infrastructure, having enough grounds and venues on which to play your sports and on which to fit your teams is also a common risk for a number of NSOs and SSAs. I think we'll come back to these risks in a little bit more detail, but you can do worse than use this as a bit of a cheat code for your own sports, for your own codes, in terms of how your risk register looks, if you have one, in terms of validating that you're not missing anything, or equally using this as a bit of a guide for when you go ahead and start to build out your own risk register and risk framework. Got anything to add there, Ian, before I forge ahead?
Forge away, DJ. Forge away.
Forge away. Okay. So, what is risk management? Well, it's the coordinated activities that direct and control an organisation with regard to risk. Note we talk about risk management here, not risk avoidance. We're not saying that you shouldn't take risk, that risk is a bad thing, as I said before. Risk is a necessary evil, and it's very appropriate to take risk in certain circumstances, but equally, in other circumstances, we want to avoid risk as best we can. The key thing really around risk management is that it's designed or it's intended to increase the certainty that a decision's intended outcome or course of action will be achieved. All right, and risk management at its really basic level involves the identification, evaluation, and prioritization of risks. It shouldn't be considered a discrete, once-in-a-lifetime siloed process or activity. Rather, it should be embedded within the practices and policies and processes of the organisation, especially those policies, processes, and activities that are concerned with decision-making. I think it's fair to say that risk management happens in all organisations because people are always considering, to some extent or the other, what they need to do to make sure a decision that they make or a course of action that they plot achieves the intended outcome. The thing to note is that often these approaches are ad hoc and inconsistent across an organisation. And the intention of risk management is that these processes or approaches, if you like, become more formal, more systematised, and more consistent across the organisation. And that brings us to enterprise risk management, enterprise-wide risk management. What is enterprise-wide risk management? Well, it's a way of ensuring consistency in the way an organisation articulates, quantifies, and ultimately manages its risk. It's about ensuring that an organisation is comparing apples with apples as far as its risk management processes are concerned. So a risk, for example, that's defined as being high or extreme or moderate in one area of the business is considered in relative terms the same thing as an issue a risk that's considered as high, extreme, or moderate in another area of the business. It's about ensuring that there's an organisational view as opposed to a siloed functional or departmental view of resource allocation as far as risk is concerned and as far as the management of risk is concerned. I think the other thing to think about with regard to enterprise-wide risk management is that it recognises the need for cross-functional dependencies cross-functional risk ownership and helps crystallise and operationalise those cross-functional dependencies across the organisation. So, for example, you might identify a risk in the high-performance arm of your sport or the operations or participation arm of your sport, but note that there is a dependency on the game development or finance arm or business services arm to provide a control or treatment or mitigation strategy for that particular high performance risk. So identifying those cross-functional dependencies is really key, and it's one of the critical factors benefits of enterprise-wide risk management.
DJ, before you go on, can I just ask you to reflect on some of the or the methodology you might use when you've been engaged by some of the NSOs that we've worked with to develop a risk management framework, particularly around who you interview and what sort of conversations you have?
Sure. So, I mean, typically I would start at the functional level and engage probably the head of and their direct reports in a particular function to get a sense of what their key risks and vulnerabilities are. And then once we've landed on those, we use that as a way of probably socializing that across other functions of the business to get a sense of where those cross-functional dependencies, etc., may lie. And I think software systems can come in quite handy here as well if a sport or an organisation is big enough to have one, because what it enables you to do is attribute or allocate mitigation strategies, treatments, controls to other people who might be outside of your function, but give them the context of what it is that they're providing a control for. Does that help, Dan? Sure. Okay. So what are some of the benefits of effective risk management? Ultimately, effective risk management takes us closer to effective execution. It forces us to think about what can go wrong, which then naturally forces us to think about what we need to do or what we ought to do to stop that from happening. It also forces us to really closely monitor progress and performance, so we're able to see early signs that we may be headed for trouble and then take proactive action to address those issues, get things back on track, if you like. It should occur with a focus on continuous improvement. So that means that we're able to learn lessons from the past to improve decision-making and challenge assumptions moving forward. And I think one of the key things here to take out of today is that if done properly, it supports effective board and executive performance, as it encourages discussion around not only upside and opportunity, but downside, which gives us a more complete picture of the operating landscape. What can go right? What can we achieve here? But equally, what can go wrong?
Darren, just a quick question coming up on the chat, just in relation to managing risk, and you mentioned of software. Are there certain types of software that organisations are using or sports are commonly using that can be recommended or people might consider?
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. Yes, there is. Look, risk management software, GRC software, governance, compliance, and risk software, that can be quite expensive, and you know we know resources are finite in the sports space, so you can get software with all the bells and whistles, but it comes at a cost. Equally, there's some more basic stuff that sports can use. What I would say with software is that it shouldn't it shouldn't be what you base your system on or your framework on. It should supplement and support your risk management framework and your approach to risk management. What I see a lot from an operational perspective is the use of checklists. And we will talk a little bit about checklists later on in the presentation, but things like Safety Culture's iAuditor can be really useful for managing operational risk, for things like managing risks at at events, managing things like pre-match and pre-start checklists, medical briefings, things like that. So yeah, there's a number of software systems out there. They all do different things really well, and they all have certain deficiencies. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over another, but I would encourage you to do due diligence as far as systems are concerned, but don't let the system drive your process. Make sure the system supports your process. And the other thing is with software systems, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as the session evolves, is don't be focused on the system as the solution to all of your risk management problems. But the risk management system will only ever be as strong as powerful as good as the information that you pump into it. And you need to learn to crawl before you walk and before you run. So getting used to the process of updating your risk register, which might sit on a Word document or might sit on an Excel spreadsheet, is really valuable before you think too much about the software system. Does that help, Anthony?
Yeah, I think a good point is that it's a continuum that that sports are on, and if you're only starting on the journey and then you're starting with your software, then you're probably getting your focus wrong. It's about getting your risk systems right, and then getting your organisation thinking about it, and then work out what software is going to complement you later on.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Can I supplement that question, Anthony, with a question about Excel, DJ, because you've seen dozens of Excel spreadsheets used as risk registers. What are the pros and cons for Big Sport members to using an Excel spreadsheet for this?
One of the pros is that they're generally pretty easy to use. Everyone knows how to use how to update an Excel spreadsheet for the most part. So farming the risk register out to other areas of the business for them to update is quite valuable. It's quite easy. Challenge there can be a little bit cumbersome sometimes from a reporting perspective, and that's really where risk management software comes in, and that's why we're talking about learning to crawl before you walk and run. I think once you start to get a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more mature in your risk journey, and you're starting to get more insights or seek more insights from your risk reporting, software systems can be really beneficial because they have that click a button and you get some really funky and insightful risk management reports. The other thing with with Excel spreadsheets, Ian, is they don't necessarily allow you to automate workflows in the same way that a risk management software system might. But again, that's not a bad thing, because early on in your risk management journey or risk management evolution, there's nothing more powerful from my perspective than sitting down face to face with a risk owner and discussing the risk and having a discussion, having it out. Whereas as you get a little bit more mature and people start to understand the lingo and the process, and you've done it a few times, automated emails, workflows, etc., allow people to just do that sort of stuff in isolation, if you like. So there are some pros and cons there. Excel can get a bit cumbersome after a while, and especially, if I relate an experience with an NSO that I worked with not so long ago, they did an amazing piece of work that came up with 160 odd risks. That's a significant number for even BHP or a massive organisation. 160 risks came up, all captured on an Excel spreadsheet. Didn't have a risk manager, and then found that those 160 risks were really hard for them to grapple. Surprise, surprise. So I went in there and was able to whittle those 160 risks down to about 30, 35. Pitched at the functional level, which meant that each risk owner or functional head, if you like, was then tasked with managing 4 or 5 risks relevant to their function. It just became a little bit easier for them to manage that way, and they weren't necessarily grappling with 160 risks on an Excel spreadsheet that we're all sort of screaming out for an owner and for someone to do something with. All right. So benefits of risk management. Move on to the next slide. Risk management and the processes around it are dictated by ISO 31000. That's the sort of the shining light for risk management globally, if you like. And what the standard is about, it's really about providing guidance on how to identify, analyse, evaluate, treat, monitor and communicate risk across the organisation, and it sells the benefits of doing so. And we'll talk a little bit more down the track on how to identify, evaluate, analyse, treat, monitor risks, etc. But that's what the focus of ISO 31000 really is about. For context, you can't be certified to ISO 31000 like you can to some other international standards. For example, 14,001 for environmental management, 9,001 for quality, or 45,001 for health and safety. All right. ISO 31000 is really something that you sort of self-assess against and use as a guide to drive your risk management efforts. All right. It promotes and describes principles upon which a solid or a sound risk management framework must be built. And these are referenced on the slide that you're looking at. Most of these principles, if you like, are fairly self-explanatory, but there are two things, or there are two principles that I want to focus in on here. The first one is the third bullet point on the left, where it talks about the key principle being that the risk management framework must be customised. ISO 31000 says that how an organisation does risk management needs to be customised and proportionate to its context and its objectives. Not all organisations need the comprehensive, robust risk management framework of a bank or BHP or of a major hazard facility. Right? So you need to keep that in mind when you go back to work and you look at your own risk management framework. Your framework needs to reflect the nature and scale of the risks that your organisation is facing in pursuit of its strategic objectives and in the environment within which it operates. Okay, and sometimes that's a discussion point, an attention point, if you like, between executives and boards. Who you have situations where boards are asking for the for the whole box and dice, and management need to push back and say, no, this is appropriate for us. So that can be a tension point, as I said, between boards and executives. The other thing I want to point out is that there's a reference there on the third bullet point on the right to human and cultural factors. One of the key changes to the most recent version of ISO 31000, which is 2018, was the highlighting of human and cultural factors as a key principle. All right. So what that did, or what that meant, was that the system itself, or the guideline itself, moved away from risk management being about a wholly systems-based approach to one that acknowledges the role of human factors and cultural impacts on risk management performance. So culture is really important as far as risk management is concerned. And we don't need to look too far in a sporting sense to talk about, to identify or find examples of poor risk cultures which have really blown up for the sports involved. In my own football team, I'm an Essendon supporter. The peptide scenario was driven in many respects by a culture that didn't necessarily embrace effective risk management controls. My old past life as the head of risk at Cricket Australia, Sandpaper Gate is an issue where the St James Ethics Centre commented on the culture that existed within the Australian cricket team at that time. So you can see how important it is to have effective risk management cultures in order to have effective risk management outcomes. Some other sectors where poor risk culture has materialised to bite the sector or organisations on the backside, they look no further than the banking industry, the financial services industry in general. NAB and the issues that they experienced, the aged care sector as well. So there are a lot of examples of environments where heavily regulated, really solid documented risk management processes and systems, but poor culture has allowed activities to occur that have actually brought the organisation undone. Anything to add
Just a
there?
query on that, Darren, just in relation to the culture is, people might be thinking, well, it sounds good, but how effectively do we do that? And this might be a slide you address further on, but what are some of the things that sports can be doing to try and improve risk culture and to integrate this into organisation behaviour?
Yeah, can I take that on? We've got a slide that's dedicated
Perfect.
exactly to that, Anthony. But
Yep.
I'll summarise that slide in a sentence. In 2 sentences. It's really about the board. So from the top of the organisation down, demonstrating a real commitment to the policies and procedures of the organisation, and holding executives and others to account for deviations from those expected policies, from those policy behaviours and expected behaviours. But we will talk about that in a bit more detail. So yeah, culture really important as far as risk management is concerned. Moving on to the next slide. The other thing to keep in mind with ISO 31000 is that it talks about the process of risk management. It goes into detail on how an organisation should identify, analyse, evaluate, treat, and review risks. All right. One thing to point out in this graphic, I think, is the top box. So the box there, the top of the figure that says scope, context, and criteria. As I said before, this box is key because it reflects the fact that the way you do risk management must be reflective of the nature, scale, and scope of your organisation and its strategic context. It needs to reflect the context of your organisation. That's something I think boards, directors need to keep in mind. It's great to want best practice and all the bells and whistles, as I said before, but for most of us and for most sports, when time, money, and human resources are scarce, it's not always possible or the best way to go to deliver something with all the bells and whistles. So it's crucial to have clarity on what the context is of your operating environment and what risk management arrangements are appropriate for that type of environment, and then build according to that. Don't go for everything because you think that's the best thing to do. Think really critically about what it is you need in your context, and then build to that. I've talked a little bit about the risk management framework, so I think it's worth sort of just exploring what a risk management framework is. Ultimately, it's a collection of activities that dictate how we design, implement, monitor, review, and improve risk management in our organisation. And that's what the standard sort of defines it as. I think the other thing to point out, though, more operationally, is that it's a document that describes how we do this, how the various elements of your approach to risk management hang together. And as I said before, BHP's or NAB's or Westpac's risk management framework would be quite comprehensive, quite complicated, all-encompassing. The risk management framework for Hockey Australia or Hockey Victoria or Calisthenics Australia or Calisthenics Victoria might be a lot less complex than that. Ultimately, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to developing a risk management framework, all right? It just needs to fit within your own operating context and the nature and scale of the risks that you face in pursuit of your strategic objectives. Having said that, regardless of how you cut and dice risk management frameworks, I think at its core, it's about 3 things. And the graphic on the right-hand side illustrates that. Ultimately, risk management is about knowing what can go wrong and what the implications of those things going wrong can be on your organisation. It's understanding of risks. The second thing it's about putting in place measures, taking actions to stop these things from occurring or lessening the impact of them occurring. And this is really what risk treatment and control is about. And then finally, it's about making sure that the controls you build, the control environment you've created, is working effectively and doing what it's supposed to do, and continually enhancing or improving systems around that. Okay, and this is what assurance and review is about. I think it's that simple. Knowing your risks, controlling them, making sure those controls are working, and trying to keep doing it better, trying to keep doing that better year on year or month on month or whatever the case may be. It's really that simple. And I think in my experience, most organizations do number one and number two really well. They know what their risks are and they have reasonable treatments or controls. Some have them really well documented and they're quite comprehensive. Others might do it a little bit more ad hoc, but they still do that stuff reasonably well. Where organizations fall down, though, is in point 3, assurance and review. And that's where boards and committees play a crucial role. I always call it the 3 A's of directorships or boards. It's about assurance, assurance, assurance. So management come in and say, yes, board, these are the risks. These are what we're doing to control those risks. And the board really needs to take the time, or an audit risk committee, a subcommittee of the board, needs to take the time to dig a little bit deeper and assure themselves or perform assurance to understand the extent to which those controls and those treatments are having the desired effect on the risk landscape that the organisation is exposed to. Anything to add there, Iain or Anthony, or any questions?
Well, I was going to suggest that now would be a good time to pause and take some questions, Anthony, because we're going to move on to what a risk management framework looks like in practice. So before we leave this section on an overview of risk management, does anyone have anything they would like to ask of us?
Yeah, and if it is too difficult, sort of type into the chat, perhaps just unmute your mic and ask a question into the session would be fine. No. Well, good. Is there something you mentioned the Finance Audit Risk Committee, DJ? Is that something that we're sort of going to cover off and sort of where sports might look to introduce that and when's a good time for it in their sort of risk journey?
It's not covered off per se, Anthony, but Iain will spend some time talking about what the board should be looking at from a risk management perspective, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to the roles of a finance audit and risk committee.
Yep.
What I would say, though, in advance of that is I've seen organisations devote a lot of time to developing risk registers and risk treatment plans, but there's been a lack of accountability to delivering that at the management or executive level for a variety of reasons. I think that can be overcome by having a really active and engaged finance, risk and audit committee, a committee that actually digs and asks questions about risk registers, about progress or lack thereof on risk treatment plans, and actually holds management to account for that progress or lack thereof. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you invest all this time, energy and effort in building a risk register, in building risk treatment plans, only to have it not necessarily acknowledged or interrogated at that next level in the governance chain.
I think it's also important to note that delegating to a finance audit risk committee or any sort of subcommittee doesn't then excuse the board and directors on the main board from their overall risk obligations. Spot on.
And we do talk about that in due course.
Right. All right. Well, there's no sort of further questions in the chat, and I think So let's move on to the next section.
Sure.
Okay. Let's do that. I'll introduce this section and DJ will go into a little bit of detail about some of the tools that might form part of your risk management framework. But DJ has done a great job of introducing the concept of a risk management framework. But really, the importance of this section is to look at what does a risk management framework look like? What are the components of the risk management framework that your organisation should take moving forward? And specifically, what tools would you have within those within that risk management framework? As DJ said, there's no one size fits all solution here, but you do need to contextualise your risk management framework and match it to your operating environment, and also customise it to the extent that's appropriate for your organisation. One thing that we did with the Australian Sports Commission when developing the suite of risk management documents that's available to NSOs and Australian sport is to create a risk maturity test, if you like. And the risk maturity of your organisation will really influence the tools that you should be thinking about introducing into your organisation's risk management framework. And how you assess what your risk maturity looks like is essentially using this conception of assessing how strong your resource capability is internally and also what your risk profile might look like. And when you add those two factors together, you come up with the matrix here on the right-hand side of the slide. Clearly for resource capability, i.e. they don't have, for example, a full-time risk management professional, and also a lower risk profile, they might be considered to have a base level of maturity. For a sport that has similar resource constraints but a higher risk profile, they might be considered to be at that emerging level and have a heightened risk management framework and incorporate or consider incorporating sets or additional tools into their risk management framework. And as you can see, for organisations with a high risk profile who have resource capability, you then move into that top right quadrant of being an organisation that has mature risk, or we'll call it mature risk maturity, if I can categorise it that way. So I would be interested in giving people a chance to reflect for 30 seconds or so on what they consider to be their organisation's appropriate risk maturity level. In our conversations, DJ and I think that SSAs would tend to fall into a base category of risk maturity or an emerging category of risk maturity. When we worked with the ASC, we identified Equestrian Australia as being an organisation having being in that top right quadrant, being mature in its risk maturity. We thought we actually identified Snow Australia as being in the emerging category, and we looked at Calisthenics Australia and felt that their risk maturity level was at the base level. But I would be interested in getting a sense from the participants on the call, Anthony, if they can drop into the chat box what they consider themselves to be within the construct of this matrix that we've got on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So people want to have a bit of a look at that, and I suppose it'd be interesting to direct Iain in the discussion about sort of where we perhaps focus attention and where sports are at. So if you're happy to have a look at that and put down whether you're base, emerging, or mature, just in the chat, it might be handy to get an idea of a bit of a straw poll on sort of where people in the session are at with risk and how that might direct Iain in our discussion.
You'll have to be my eyes and ears on the chat box too, Anthony. Let me know what people are thinking.
That's okay. Yeah, we're starting to come in now. So yeah, as expected, a base, a couple of base starting out. So base emerging.
So fairly consistent response by the sounds of things.
I think base is winning out in the early voting, Iain, and emerging's coming through. Nothing, I suppose, yet from a mature sense. So I think your analysis of where we're at in the sort of state sport area is in that sort of base and emerging, and coming fairly consistently through on what's coming through on the chat. So
Good. Okay.
Looking your
Well,
lining.
let's draw a line under that, Anthony, and explain why it's important to, in our view, identify where you sit on the spectrum of risk maturity. And it's really because your level of risk maturity probably dictates the level of or the number of tools that you might incorporate into your risk management framework. And what we have on the slide here is what we'd consider to be all of the necessary risk management tools that an organisation, either at the base level or at the mature level, might incorporate into its risk management framework. Clearly, those at the base level are not going to adopt as many tools into their risk management framework as a more sophisticated organisation with greater capability for managing their risk management program. I think this is a helpful roadmap for all organisations to reflect on. For those SSAs who don't have anyone internal to their business who has particular risk management expertise, one of the benefits of this slide is that it gives you some insight as to what it is you should be tracking towards in establishing or in updating the risk management framework that you do have. So as you can see, for a base level organisation, the tools that we would advise you to bring into your risk management framework would include a risk management policy, a risk matrix, risk register, formalised risk reporting, and then an annual risk management work plan. So a calendar of activities that the board and executive will put into place to monitor and update the risk management framework. Again, no one size fits all model, as DJ has mentioned, but this certainly does give some insight as to where you might want to be heading within your own organisation. I should point out, though, that there are particular topics, there are particular focus areas that come into play in an organisation from time to time. Child safety and the recent introduction of updated Victorian child safe standards does mean that an organisation might need to put into play a more sophisticated response to particular types of risks that are coming into the inbox of the CEO. But certainly, I wouldn't say that for a base level organisation you should be adopting a particularly fully sophisticated model at the level of mature in relation to all risks. It might just be that there are these individual risks from time to time that you do put a greater risk overlay over the top of. I'm going to pass it back to DJ to talk about some of those documents that sit within this table. So I'll give it back to you, DJ.
Can you just stay on that table, Iain, for a tick? There's just something I want to point out on it. I think this was developed, as Iain said, for some work we did with the ASC, but it's really come about as well because developing a risk management framework can be quite daunting. So a board, an audit and risk committee, a director will say we need a risk management framework, and that action will be passed to a COO or a company secretary or finance manager or whatever it is, and then they have to make sense of it. And as I said, it can be quite daunting. Where do you start? What's involved in it? And you can't really see the end point of that directive. So this framework that we've developed, if you like, or this table can really help guide that deliberation. It chunks things down and serves to make that task a little bit more manageable, a little bit less daunting, and a bit easier to deliver on. As Iain said, no one size fits all, and it might be that you want to do something that's listed as mature as opposed to base early doors. That's fine, but it's just a very useful way of making quite a comprehensive, cumbersome, challenging task that little bit more manageable for someone who might not necessarily be a risk management professional. Thanks, Iain. So the first thing we're speaking about is the risk management policy. So essentially, the risk management policy is something that brings the whole risk management framework together in one page. It's similar to a work health and safety, OHS, or environmental policy. Okay, it's a statement of commitment, intent, and general approach. What are we going to do from a risk management perspective, and how are we going to achieve it? It balances the current state with an aspirational element as well. So there's nothing wrong with saying that we're looking to take these steps with our risk management approach in your risk management policy. And in many ways, it's a shorter version of the risk management document without the procedural detail and contextual guff that you might find in the risk management framework. It can be displayed on your website, notice boards, handed out in induction packs, and for that added degree of gravitas, if you like, it could and should be signed off by the CEO and or chair. The next thing we'll talk about is the risk management matrix, the risk matrix. To me, it's the cornerstone of the risk assessment, analysis, and evaluation piece, in that it allows for systematic, objective, and consistent rating of risk. It's generally comprised of three distinct but related parts, that being your likelihood ratings and descriptors, your consequence rating and descriptors, and the colourful risk matrix itself. What I want to focus a bit of time on is the consequence rating and descriptors. All right, so these are really key, and these need to be customised and really closely interrogated and validated at an organisational level. Firstly, you need to decide on what categories you're thinking about. So some of the more common categories that consequence descriptors sit across would be financial, reputational, people, legal and compliance, brand, performance, high performance, etc. So what we're looking for in these descriptors is really objective measures around what is catastrophic versus major versus moderate versus minor versus insignificant in terms of risk magnitude or risk consequence. So there's a truckload of these available online. So you can do worse than pulling something off the internet, but then you must spend some time customizing and validating it from your own sports perspective.
And DJ, just on that, the Clearinghouse Courts Commission on their governance resources page, there's risk templates there, so like a template risk policy, that type of thing. So I've just put that in the chat now. If people want to go and be able to pick up those and access them, it's a pretty good starting place just for some basic risk documents.
Spot on. Thanks, Anthony. And they were probably drafted by myself and Iain through an engagement we did. So, yes, spend some time validating or making sure that those risk categories are appropriate for the nature and scale of your organisation. For example, we're talking about catastrophic financial impacts. For Cricket Australia, it might be a loss of $50 million, $70 million. For Hockey Victoria or Hockey Australia, it might be a loss of $300,000 or $400,000. So we need to make sure that those descriptors are pitched at the right level for the sport that we're concerned with. A good way of doing that is to apply real-life examples and stress test the assumptions that you've made through these things. So landing on a good, robust, validated set of consequence descriptors can only help you going forward. And they also elicit some really good conversations between the executive and board/audit and risk committee. Iain, the risk register. So the risk register is the foundation of an organisation's risk management efforts. Okay, it's really the central repository of all information risk related. It contains information on what the risks are, how they materialise, what the likelihood, impact, and magnitude of those risks are, and how those risks might be managed, and what more needs to be done from a treatment perspective. Risk registers can be either operational and sort of at the working level, or they can be quite strategic in nature, or they can be a combination of both. There's no right or wrong answer to what they need to be, and they both, all of these different types of risk registers serve different purposes. They can be functional or departmental, they can be organisational, or they can be project versus event based. So a risk register will be built depending on what context it is you've defined as being needed. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's a couple of different approaches to how you can build your risk register. You can go with the approach of documenting every risk under the sun for your organisation, or you can go with documenting the critical few, what I described as the critical few. As I said before, I worked with a client that went the each and every way, and they had 160 risks in their risk register. It proved too much for them to do anything meaningful with. So we scaled it back and we went down the path of the critical few. So just documenting, capturing, spending time discussing those risks that are most material to the organisation, and getting a better handle on exactly what those risks are. Risk registers are probably the most common thing I see at an organisational level, but sometimes or often there's little else done to support and operationalise those registers. So if you have gone to the challenge, or sorry, to the trouble of building a risk register, the worst you can do for yourself, or sorry, the least you can do for yourself is actually take the next step and keep updating it, keep delivering the treatments that you've committed to, so it retains a degree of currency and utility within the organisation. Typically, a risk register will be built through a facilitated risk workshop, either facilitated by someone like myself, who's a risk management professional, or someone in the organisation who's been tasked with facilitating the process. Generally like to have key decision makers and subject matter experts in the room, and doing so in that environment is really powerful because it allows people to challenge each other's assumptions and opens eyes to black spots, etc., which might not necessarily have been exposed had we done it in isolation or in a series of one-on-one meetings. For some of the smaller sports, and in fact the bigger sports, I guess, joint executive and board sessions can be really quite powerful as well. What I've seen a trend towards is an executive team having the first crack at a risk register, getting it to a point that they're happy with, and then going to the board for a joint executive and board session for that board validation of the executive work. That's a really good way of building a risk register. So what does a risk register look like? In my view, there are four, sorry, we'll talk a little bit about some of these more common risks that we see across the NSOs and SSAs of the world. As I said before, use this as a cheat code for your own organisational risk register build or risk register validation project. Are all of the broad areas reflected in this slide reflected in your risk register? If not, why not? If so, give yourself a pat on the back and move on. Not all sports are the same, but many will share very similar challenges and risks to each other. Ian, is there anything you'd add here at this point?
I guess the opportunity exists for sports to compare and contrast, because there is that commonality of issues and risks across sports, both at national and state level. So the community of knowledge, the community of practice, is something that can be tapped into to help develop really, really strong risk registers, organisation by organisation.
Thank you. Sorry?
No, we're all good, Darren. No other
Keep going,
questions.
DJ.
Okay. All right. So what we'll do now is just have a look at a sample risk register. And to my mind, or in accordance with ISO 31000, I should say, there's 4 key steps in building your risk register. The first step of the assessment process is identifying the risk. And this is where we use that cause, risk, event, consequence model that we spoke about earlier in the presentation today. Being able to clearly articulate what the risk event is, clearly articulate what the causes are, and clearly articulate what the consequences or impact of that risk event materializing is quite important. And if you do that effectively, it sets you up for the rest of the process really well. If you're a little bit unclear and convoluted in identifying the risk event, the cause, and the consequence, it can trip you up later on in the process. So spend some time getting this right. Like any good building, the foundations of what comes above, the foundations are really important in terms of what comes above. Step 2 is where we perform the first run at a risk analysis. And this really is where we rate the risk event, or sorry, the likelihood of the risk event occurring and the consequence of the risk materializing. But we do it at this point without any controls being in place. So this is where it's important to have a really robust risk matrix, robust consequence descriptors, robust likelihood descriptors, so that we can get a sense of what magnitude of risk we're dealing with. The example that we've got here is a loss in government funding. We've said it can be caused by government failure to comply with funding obligations, and it will result in inability to deliver core programs, potential termination of staff, and other consequences. We've said in this analysis that the likelihood of this occurring is likely, and if it does occur, it's major. That gives us a high risk rating. Again, we're not thinking about controls at this stage, so we're just looking at what we call inherent risk. Once we've got a sense of this, we go on to the third step. And the third step is where we look at what we call the risk evaluation. So this is where we start to think about what existing control strategies we have in place. We document those, and then we have a think about how effective those controls are. In this case, we've said that we're continually lobbying both key political parties and that we're regularly reporting to the government on the outcomes of their funding. We don't think that's very effective. It's between 40 and 60%. So clearly more can be done there. Having said that, we think that with this in place, it's possible that this risk will materialise, and the consequence, if it does, will be moderate. So there's a residual risk rating of medium. All right. The fourth step of the process, then becomes, right, what do we need to do about this risk to ensure, to give us a better handle on A, it not happening, or B, if it does happen, we're insulated somewhat or protected somewhat. And we've come up with some further treatment plans. When we come up with treatment plans, we need to allocate them to a responsible individual and preferably assign a time or target date to the delivery of that treatment strategy. And this is where treatment plans become crucial. So that's the 4 steps to A, completing a risk assessment, and B, to documenting those risks in a risk register. So you can see a complete picture of a fairly comprehensive risk register there on your screen. That is available at the link that Anthony just pointed out through the ASC's website. And what hangs off that is a number of other risk treatment plan templates and also Excel automatically generated basic reports. As I said, the risk register is the foundation of your risk management efforts. And if you do that effectively, it sets up the rest of the process pretty well for you. The next tool we'll talk about is the risk appetite statement. We'll probably spend all day talking about risk appetite. It's a really interesting one, and we'll explore some of that interest a little bit as we work through this. Reading off the slide there, one of the most important roles of the board in risk management is developing an understanding about the nature and extent of the organisation is prepared to accept in pursuit of its purpose. This is often called defining a risk appetite, and that comes from the AICD. The risk appetite itself, it essentially provides parameters within which management can pursue the organisation's objectives. So alignment between your risk appetite and your purpose or your strategy is crucial for there to be utility in the risk appetite statements. If an organisation is not prepared to accept enough risk, it might not be very efficient in pursuing its purpose, but equally, if it accepts too much risk, it could expose itself to undesirable consequences that ultimately undermine its performance. So defining and documenting the organisation's appetite for risk in support of an appropriate risk culture, which aligns to the strategy and purpose, is key. I think identifying a risk appetite statement for most boards and executives is quite challenging. So we say that this is probably something that occurs in the emerging phase of, or should occur in the emerging phase of your risk maturity. There could be, and they're completely justifiable views why it should occur earlier or later. But again, I think it's better to get a sense of what your risks are, get through a process of reporting on those risks, regularly reporting the risk, updating your risk register, etc., and then get a little bit more sophisticated in your conversations around risk before you start to then move towards documenting risk appetite statements. An example that I often give when talking to sports around risk appetite is that it's really important for a company like, let's say, BHP or Rio Tinto to have really comprehensive and well-articulated risk appetite statements, because they've got people going around the world looking for greenfield sites, and the board need to have provide some guidance around what type of sites and where those sites may be in order for the organisation to achieve its objectives within its risk appetite. And they might say, look, we're only going to, from a risk appetite perspective, we're only going to invest in companies with countries with a B+ credit rating, and we're only going to invest in projects with a return on investment of X%. So therefore, management know where they can go, what countries they should be looking at, and what rate of return they need on projects before they even think about operationalising them. That's a really clear mandate for management to work within in pursuit of its strategic objectives. Not all sports work in the same way. Many NSOs, many clubs, many associations do the same thing year after year after year. So having clear definition around what it can and can't do with respect to those repeatable, continual type activities isn't necessarily as important to those operating in a more entrepreneurial state. That's not to say it's not needed. It's probably just not as critical in terms of a risk management activity that I'd be looking to embark on. Iain, is there anything you could add to that?
No, all good, DJ.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say is that there are areas of risk appetite that are, from a sporting perspective and more broadly, that are almost they're mandated or they're legislated. You have to have zero appetite for child safeguarding issues, work health and safety issues, because the law says that. So we don't necessarily need that guidance in that space.
Just on that one, DJ, that something that comes up that we see a bit is sports wanting to understand their risk appetite on investing. Let's say they've got some money in the bank and some capital reserve, of where's the board at in terms of what's their appetite for investment, and do they want is there a safe appetite for risk there of just bank interest, or is there a moderate return of chasing more aggressive, or is there a highly aggressive and buying cryptocurrency and this type of thing? But this is something that sort of comes up a bit that we see.
That's a great example, Anthony, and that's certainly a case where you would encourage that type of risk appetite based discussion. And one thing I'd say with boards and with those types of discussions is that in the absence of a formalised risk appetite statement, when those decisions are made, at least having that discussion and documenting the outcomes of those discussions is valuable and is key. in the absence of a formal risk appetite statement. I think I'd be keen to get a sense from the people on the meeting at the moment whether they've had any positive or negative experiences with risk appetites in their respective sporting organisations, just to hear some of those experiences and get a sense of what the lay of the land is out there.
Yeah, it might be easier if we did want to raise a point of just perhaps unmute yourself and you'll be able to be heard in the room.
Yeah, Anthony, David from the Wimmera Regional Sports Assembly here. We're going through a sustainability plan at the moment where we're looking at ways of making ourselves more sustainable going forward, and less reliant upon core funding, and part of the report was to look at alternatives and diversifying our income, and some of the recommendations that come back are, my board looked at it and thought it was quite high risk in relation to seeking alternative funding, and we our board made a decision to probably not accept that recommendation compared to some of the other recommendations where we could work with SSAs or other organisations where we've got a lower fruit hanging opportunity compared to a higher risk one, and so I guess that's an example of a risk appetite that we chose not to go down that the path of a recommendation compared to other recommendations on that report.
David, can I ask a question there? Did you guys have, in coming to that or those decisions, did you guys have in place a formal risk appetite statement, or was that just a conversation that evolved as a result of the recommendations? No,
Darren, we didn't have a risk appetite statement in place at this point in time. But given the nature of the path that we're going down, it's something that we're going to have to look at. As an EO, that I think it's something that we have to look at going forward. And the more that you talk, the more that I'm listening as to the direction that we possibly could be going down.
Thanks, David. And I think that's the key thing. As I said before, there is a place for risk appetite statements, no doubt. But where you don't have one in place, having the conversation, having the discussion, having the deliberation is just as valuable. And it then does sort of force you to think maybe we need to formalise this more. And I think when you do start when you do start thinking like that, it's probably time to start considering formalising that anyway. So it seems like a good logical evolution and path that you guys are on.
Yeah. So thank you.
And a point just raised in the chat. Yeah, just a point raised in the chat, DJ, about the difference between the risk appetite of an organisation and that of their stakeholders. So let's say we're hosting an event and the stakeholder needs a certain standard for the event to be run to. It might be different to what the organisation sees as their risk standard or appetite.
Yeah, right. Great insights there. Thank you. Anyone else got any experiences that they'd like to share regarding risk appetites? Again, being helpful or otherwise? Or anyone grappling with whether to develop them at the moment or not? Okay, perhaps we'll just forge on.
Yep, let's move on.
Yeah. I think the other thing to say risk appetite is that they come in many different forms. So they can be either qualitative or quantitative, and it doesn't necessarily matter what they are, as long as they're providing management and the organisation more broadly with the intended utility. And that is providing guidance as to what risk is appropriate in what circumstance and why. All right. Moving on. Other tools for developing risk or delivering risk management. I think yeah, there's 4 tools reflected here. We spoke before about the annual risk management work plan. Ultimately, what we want to do in order to systematise and formalise risk management activities is have a document that says, right, this is what we're going to do and this is when we're going to do it. And that's what your annual risk management work plan is. It doesn't need to be crazy and comprehensive. It can be a calendar-based system. It can be a simple table that says in June we're going to do X, in July we're going to do Y, and who's going to do X and who's going to do Y. That's all it needs to be. But what it does do is it assists with resource allocation across the business. So it gives people a heads up that these things are coming and that they might need to invest some time, energy, and effort into that. And it also helps embed practices across the organisation. Key risk indicators are something that you start to do when you're quite mature. So moving from emerging into mature. Okay, what they are essentially metrics to enhance risk management, monitoring, mitigation, and reporting. They're essentially the canary in the coal mine, and they help you to identify when things are starting to go off track, so that you can take preemptive action before it's all too late. The key to comprehensive and good key risk indicators is really solid data. Issues and breaches register. There's nothing like having a catalogue of things that have gone wrong, risks that have materialised, so that you can look back on things and make sure that the framework that you've built and the processes you've built, the procedures you've built to support it are actually reflective of the environment that you're operating in. They allow control weaknesses and deficiencies to be identified and to be solved for. The final thing is control testing, and this comes to the assurance piece. Key for boards. Again, when you're at that sort of mature level of risk maturity, if I can use those terms, you want to develop a program whereby someone independent is assessing the effectiveness of your control environment, giving you a tap on the back when controls are seen to be doing what they're intended to be doing, but equally raising the red flag when your control environment isn't working as effectively as you thought it might be. So again, come back to this idea around boards, audit and risk committees, digging deep into the risk register and getting a sense of how effective the control environment is. It's not good enough for the board to be told something's working effectively. The board needs to perform assurance. Someone needs to perform assurance for the board to get a sense that things are actually working as effectively as management might be saying that they are.
And just to reiterate again, DJ, of course, the last 3 there aren't tools that we expect most SSAs to go out and discuss with their boards or their management committees tomorrow. These are, of course, tools that can be embedded into the organisation's risk management framework over a longer term if your organisation does get to a heightened level of risk maturity.
Sure, thanks, Iain. So moving ahead, the next slide. What I've done is I've taken my view of the risk framework, the 3 things, understanding what your risks are, building controls around those risks, and then performing assurance to make sure the controls are working effectively. And I've just transposed some of the tools that we've spoken about onto the various parts of that process. It's not an exact science, but what we can say is that the tools that we've spoken about fit nicely or wrap nicely around the 3 fundamentals that I consider to be crucial to good risk management. Board reporting, of course, could quite easily be on the left-hand side of this diagram, as it could, should, and well, it is, relate to the whole of the risk management process, but equally, it's really, really important from an assurance perspective. So how do we build a risk management framework? How do we implement a risk management framework? This graphic is really showing you what I consider to be a fairly logical and chunked down version of what your risk management journey could look like. It accords with the table that Iain showed earlier, which Iain spoke to, which showed the core elements of the risk management framework at the base, emerging and mature levels of risk maturity. And it serves as a skeleton of a risk management work plan that is pretty logically sequenced and is designed to allow you to, as I said before, crawl before you walk and walk before you run. We've spread it out over 24 months. You could potentially accelerate that or even slow it down further, depending on who's doing the work and how critical or crucial the work is to your organisation. But ultimately, it's a chunked down, bite-sized version of how you guys can build a risk management framework without making you lose your hair or turn it grey like myself. In terms of more operational guidance for clubs and associations, checklist to your friend. The operational risk can be managed with checklists, match day checklists, event risk management checklists, travel risk management checklists. So online, there are a number of match day checklists that are essentially provided by sport insurers. The AFL, basketball, and cricket have them. And the expectation there is that there's a checklist that someone at a club or association goes out and performs a physical check and inspection of playing surface, the immediate surrounds, the club rooms, etc., to sign off and say that things are ready to host a match or a training session. It's there as a prompter. It's there to show, to help you demonstrate due diligence, especially when things go pear-shaped. And it's also there to help you not forget to do certain important things. There's event risk management checklist. So making sure you've got the appropriate medical services and capability in place, making sure a venue is ready to open up, making sure that activations have been appropriately vetted and are safe for punters to partake of. The internet's your friend. There's a heap of risk management related checklists available online. So find those, adapt those for your unique circumstances, deploy them, and most importantly, build on them over time. You'll find things that work, you'll find things that don't work, you'll find you've missed certain things. Build these things and adapt them and keep deploying them over time, and don't sort of stop at one pass of developing a checklist. Engage your network. As Iain said before, you can go to the national body, the state association, other people that are on this call, to get a sense of what they're using, whether it's been valuable for them, and seek their assistance in developing checklists and tools that you guys can operationalize at a club or association level. Ultimately, good risk management for clubs and associations is about having a plan to manage the risks that you're exposed to, and keep trying to evolve that approach to become a little bit more systematized, a little bit more formal, a little bit more consistent across the whole of your operating sphere. But again, in doing that, you don't need to build a risk management plan for a major hazard facility. You're not that. Make sure it's reflective of the nature and scale of the risk that your organisation is exposed to. Iain?
Thanks, DJ. Again, Anthony, going to move to the last section. So before we do, anyone wants to make any observations or ask any questions, please do so now.
No, nothing coming through on the chat. No, if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, please do. Otherwise, we'll move on to the final section.
Okay, thank you. And the time looks like it's tracking okay, Anthony. Just a few observations, a few comments on what all of the content we've shared with you to date does mean in practical terms for directors, for management committee members and the like. Clearly, want to start with an overview of what the key roles are for directors in relation to risk management. And clearly, risk management is one of many duties that or roles that a director of a board must continue to diligently pursue as part of their responsibilities as a director. In terms of what it means in the risk management context, the general role that the directors have is to provide risk oversight. And if I can break that down into two different parts of risk oversight, the first is clearly the oversight over the structure or the tools for risk management. So setting up the risk management framework and then embedding that into the day-to-day of how the organisation goes about its business. And included in that oversight of the structure or the system for risk management, considerations of risk appetite is something that will be driven by the directors around the board table, taking into account some of the considerations that DJ has raised, particularly around documenting that at the appropriate time for organisations. The second part of the broader oversight role of the directors is in relation to that assurance piece that DJ was speaking about earlier, the assurance rule of thumb. One of the principal roles for directors is to ensure that there's appropriate supervision, monitoring, and reviewing of risk reporting that's coming in. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a second, but clearly reporting of risk-based information to directors has to be set at the appropriate level for the organisation to ensure that the directors are appropriately discharging their duties. And related overall role of directors to ensure that the risk culture of an organisation is appropriate for the organisation, taking into account some of the references DJ made earlier to ISO 31000 and its new edition of human and cultural factors. Going into a bit more detail, diving into the detail as to what oversight might consist of on a day-to-day or a month-to-month basis for directors or management committee members. It's not enough to set and forget the risk management framework at the outset. Boards should obviously constantly be reviewing the risk management framework and ensuring that it's fit for purpose. This might take the form of an annual review of the risk management framework, but it also might involve a more regular review of risk management activities within the organisation. So that might include the section on the board meeting agenda around risk management. It might mean the way board papers are written incorporates considerations of risk and so on and so forth. So it's a consideration for your board or the board of your organisation to take into account how to embed risk management related considerations into your governance processes. We spoke earlier, Anthony, about the Audit and Risk Committee and the role that plays. I think it really does depend on the nature of the organisation, the sophistication of its risk management process and so forth. But the observation you made around any delegation to an Audit and Risk Committee not derogating your responsibility as a director is a very valid point to make again here. Any Audit and Risk Committee deliberation or any Audit and Risk Committee activity should clearly be reported back to the board. Another important part of the risk oversight function in a practical sense is to ensure that the organisation has in place an effective compliance system, internal audit functions, and that can also be supplemented with external audit functions as well, of course. And a couple of other minor things to mention in relation to the oversight role. Directors, boards do have the responsibility to maintain appropriate insurances for directors and officers, the form of D&O liability insurance, but also they might be considering management liability insurance too for the executive team to support their actions in relation to risk management processes. Finally, we said at the outset, I said earlier that we see crisis management or critical incident management being the inverse of risk management. So what to do in the event that an organisation's risks, material risks, do crystallise. Important for the board to be preparing now for the worst case scenario. With the program or the project that we've been doing with the ASC over the last few years, it's been something that we've made a point of ensuring with the NSO clients we've worked with that whatever crisis management plan is put in place has to be ratified by the board of the organisation, so that there is clear accountability held at the board level as well as management level for a process for managing critical incidents as and when, or if and when they materialise. In relation to risk culture, a couple of different definitions of risk culture on the slide here. And to us, these are illustrating two important points about good risk culture in an organisation. And the first definition mentions the word shared. Really, that indicates to us the value of having an integrated approach to risk management across an organisation. So it's not just one aspect of an organisation that is focused on risk management. It is a collective approach, collective buy-in from all parts of the business to the organisation's overall risk management approach. Second definition talks about norms of behaviour, norms and traditions of behaviour. In our view, this really illustrates the point that it's important to have a common approach across an organisation as to how it will conduct risk management. So really a shared understanding from top to bottom, from one side of the business to the other side of the business, as to how risk management will be put in place or will be conducted in a consistent fashion. In practical terms, I think this was raised in a question earlier. Some of the things that we would note in this space for board members to concentrate on in embedding a positive risk management culture across the organisation are simple things, communicating and demonstrating to employees through their own role modelling behaviour and conduct the importance of policies and procedures, especially those that relate to risk management. Critically, directors and executive managers, for that matter, should ensure that all employees within the organisation are aware of their roles, responsibilities and obligations. And the comment there in relation to control environment simply suggests that where controls are allocated out to individual employees, that those allocations are understood and staff members are aware of what that requires them to do to deliver on the controls that have been allocated to them. Similarly, ensuring and embedding a risk-focused culture does require individual directors to continually monitor the control environment and supporting systems with a continuous improvement focus. The other thing that I think is really valuable for supporting the embedding of a risk management culture is this idea of catching it and calling it when you see good behaviours. So encouraging and rewarding behaviours that align with organisational values. Ultimately, in line with the observation about continuous improvement, it's not enough for a board to sit on its hands in relation to risk management. DJ has mentioned this a few times, but it's really valuable for the board to be constantly surveying where the organisation's risk management system is at, working out where it needs to get to, and then actively overseeing the steps that are being undertaken to bring about progress to achieve the desired target state. And then just finally, one last slide in relation to risk reporting. So a few practical points for both executives and board members to take into consideration when thinking about the concept of risk reporting and the assurance that comes with risk reporting. with risk reporting, the directors really need to fight for the information that they need or want. And this overall takes the form of seeking out regular reporting, but also reporting on everything. So the good, the bad, the indifferent, the progress or lack of progress on the risk management activities of the organisation. Key is also to ensure that the information provided is reliable. And what I'd also add here is that the management and board agree on an appropriate reporting framework that is mutually beneficial. So again, fight for the information. Board members fight for the information that they need to understand what they need to know to discharge their responsibilities. Risk reporting isn't a static approach. Risk reporting may change the way information is shared back with the board. It might include the establishment of an audit and risk committee, the disestablishment of an audit and risk committee, new focus areas that the board seeks enhanced reporting on, and one other way for the board to hold executive and functional management to account is to, from time to time, step into a functional area and undertake a deep dive on how that particular aspect of the business is managing the risk function within that part of the business. Continuous improvement focus we've spoken about, but the last thing we wanted to make the point on here is that risk reporting can be time consuming. It can suck up the resources, the limited and constrained resources of sports organisations. So you have to find a balance between sucking up those resources, but also providing meaningful and valuable information back to board members, committee members, so that they have enough to be able to discharge their obligations as directors. It doesn't mean spending all of your board meeting talking about risk, but it does mean finding that right balance so that you are getting the information that you need to ensure that oversight of the risk management function. So, DJ, did you want to add anything on those last couple of slides before we open it up for some final questions?
No, I will. I think we talk about risk management being a standalone item, and in many respects it is, and it can be, and it ought to be in certain circumstances. But ISO 31000 also talks about risk management being integrated across the business. So don't just look to your risk management reports for risk management reporting. Try to integrate that into new business cases, into other elements of board papers, so that it does serve to integrate the ideas and practices around risk management across broader business activities. Thanks, Iain.
Thanks, DJ. Anthony, conscious of the time, happy to open it up to further questions.
Yeah, thanks, Iain. I'll invite anyone if they did wanted to ask any questions. It's perhaps a good time now just to sort of unmute yourself and bring yourself into the session to ask a question. We've got, I think Iain and DJ have given us quite a comprehensive overview of risk management and sort of where to go and wherever you're at in the journey. So if sports have, anyone has any queries on that or where they should go and help they should get, then it's a good opportunity to ask those questions of Iain and Darren. Whilst people are perhaps thinking about that, what I might do, Iain, is I've just posted, there's an online risk training for directors course, also on the Sports Commission, and that's a resource. I know that that Margot Foster, being one of your SIGPA consultants, Iain, and also ex-Vic Sport chair, I know Margot appears in that online training resource, and I'd recommend that to sports and people that want to pass it on to directors and the rest of it. I think it's a very handy resource. So I've just posted that in the chat.
Looks like Bron Perry wants to ask a question, Anthony.
Oh, Bron, have you got your hand up? Have you, Bron?
I'm trying to be polite. Yes, I put my hand up.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, Brian.
That's
How
all
you
right.
going?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks, Ian. Thanks, DJ. Great session. I think obviously what's been covered today is what to do. I was just wondering whether there's some learning around some really red flags around what not to do, just in terms of frameworks and boards and committees.
I'm going to let DJ kick off with that one.
It's a great question, Ron. I think if we think about real life examples of situations where things have gone awry in the sporting world, some high profile examples, Essendon and Cricket Australia with Sandpapergate. It's about allowing blind spots to fester. And a lot of that is around the high performance space. I think the St James Ethics Centre said that the Australian cricket team existed in a gilded bubble where they lived in their own reality, and it was sort of separated from the rest of the business. So I would say, in that sense, is as a risk manager or a person charged with implementing risk management across the organisation, get your nose into every nook and cranny and get a sense of what's going on, because it's the blind spots typically where things fester and then end up biting you on the bum. Getting your nose under the hood, really. Does that help, Rob?
Yeah, it's a great answer, DJ. And I think Ian and I dealt with one of those similar issues at Basketball Australia many moons ago. But I think that blind spots is a great way to describe it. You can make the assumptions that you're across all the detail, but getting into all the nooks and crannies of a business and organisation is it's a good tip. So thank you.
Thank you. The other thing I'd say is in building your framework, it's kind of change management 101 in many respects. It's find champions, it's find allies, and look to deploy within the functions and the activities of those allies and supporters and champions, so that it's not just you singing out from the rafters that this is really important, but you get a really group of active supporters and advocates for your activities, which again helps you spread the news far and wide and get into areas of the business that you might not necessarily be welcomed into with open arms. The other thing I'd say on that, Ron, you've opened up a can of worms here, is in thinking about risks that can materialise in your own sport, in your own ecosystem, don't be hamstrung by only looking at your own sport and looking at your own ecosystem. Learn from other sports, learn from other codes, learn from what's happened in America, in Europe, in Asia. As I said before, all sports are different, but we share many of the same challenges. And those that are too insular in the way they look at those challenges and assess those challenges can often be brought undone by things that are happening out there in the world that they've just turned a blind eye to for whatever reason.
Excellent. Thanks, DJ. If there's any other questions there, please take the chance now to perhaps either raise your hand or bring yourself in.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony.
Hi,
I'll
Ian.
jump in.
Thanks. Just muted yourself, Ian.
There we go. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, DJ, for a really great session. Acknowledging that SSOs or sporting organisation boards are volunteers, the operations team at those organisations are also fairly time poor. You know, they've got to get on with the ops. What's the sort of the gold practice, if you like, or the gold standard with reviewing, you know, the risk matrix and the framework? Yeah, we tend to at times develop policies and they chuck them in the policy register and a bit of a set and forget. But this one's obviously, really important. So gold standard in terms of reviewing and updating those policies. What's your experience to date, or indeed recommendation?
It's a great question, Ian, and one that we grapple with a lot. I think my sense is, and I spoke about it when we were talking about risk registers. It's you've got this view of capturing all of your risks and cataloguing all your risks, or dealing with the critical few. For sporting organisations that are largely volunteer run, as you said, and resource constrained, my view is go for the critical few. If you're focusing on the risks in your risk register that can shape the sport to its foundation, and you're doing that regularly, that's a great thing. And again, that's also why I don't know that for some of those types of sports, Ian, that it's worth having a risk management framework per se. It's probably enough for that sport to review its risk register, which contains the 5 or 6 most material risks to that organisation on a quarterly, 6-monthly, annual basis, and not get caught up in all of this other stuff that quite frankly no one has time to do or time to do properly. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. You got to, is it Catherine Merson? Catherine, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I do. A great session. Thanks so much. I wondered what tips or advice you have for running effective crisis management simulations.
Yeah, this is a big part of SIGPA's practice, and as Iain said, we've been contracted by the AAS to run crisis management simulations across over 30 NSOs to this point in time. The key thing, and Iain, jump in here, is probably a few things from my perspective. The first one is the simulation itself needs to be realistic enough, but equally scary enough to create that burning platform and call to action. If you do something too far-fetched, or if you do something that's not really a crisis, you're not necessarily going to get the best bang for buck and get the call to action that you're expecting from that simulation. So having someone within the business that's able to validate the scenario that you're planning and help you sort of navigate that and get the right level of the right amount of pain, if we can call it that, is really important. Getting support and buy-in from the CEO and executive level also is important, because you need it to be taken seriously. So I'd say those two things. Iain, what could you add? Or what would you add?
I'd add something else as well. I mean, one of the weaknesses with some of these simulation responses is that people who have been in them haven't understood the system well enough, haven't understood the documented process. We've spoken today a lot about what a documented risk management framework might look like, but what we've done with the OAS and the ASC is created a documented critical incident methodology. So that methodology is designed to codify common sense, a phrase we often use in our training session with NSOs, so that people are fully aware of what their roles might be in a critical incident, and also how they might, or how the critical incident management team might respond to that. But if you go into a critical incident simulation without a clear understanding of your role and what the methodology looks like, the simulation isn't as strong as where you've done some pre-lifting to understand the system.
That's great. It's really helpful.
If there's any other queries there, for people to make themselves live. They're looking lots of thank yous and very informative sessions in the comments, Iain and DJ. So it's been great. Thank you. Just people have been asking in relation to the presentation, the recording. We will send out to the group links to all the information and the presentation. I think that one thing that really came out to me is where sports are at, whether they're base, emerging, or even mature, is that everyone, wherever you're at in the continuum of your risk journey, something can be done. It's a case of sort of working out where you're at and then stepping out that process. And there's some really good slides in there DJ, that I think really covers that off and gives people sort of stepping stones that they can get to advance themselves with their risk management.
Spot on, Anthony. I think that the thing is, and the reason we presented it that way is that we don't want people to be daunted by the risk management journey, and it can be, but chunking things down, going step by step, and having a clear plan is key.
Yeah, and I think that the experience we have is that some sports start out and they might get a bit stuck in their journey and they can't see the forest through the trees. So I think if sports do get in that space or they need some independent help, then I think by all means your details are in the presentation as to seek some independent assistance and try and bring people in that can provide you with the guidance to get you back on track.
Correct. Thank you.
Good, excellent. Okay, well, that just takes us about into time. I'm not sure if Lisa's still with us and want to sort of close up and thank everyone, Lisa, or I'm happy to do that myself.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm happy to say a few things, but firstly, thank you to you, Anthony, for pulling this together and for support of SRV, and thanks to Darren and Iain and some great questions. It's a challenging area. We've been tackling this and tackle it every 6 months at Vic Sport, and our risk profile is probably in terms of out on the ground sporting action a lot less than many on the call, but it's still a challenging process that takes a while to get through. And Anthony and one of our finance audit and risk members have led us through the risk appetite process and statements. So it was good to hear that discussion today, but certainly don't end the discussion here. If there's any questions that people have got, please send them through to Anthony or myself of Vic Sport, and we can follow up. But thank you so much to Darren and Iain for a comprehensive set of information, challenges, suggestions, and we'll be certainly sharing this video and also sharing the PowerPoint for continued discussion. And as I said, we can follow up in any way that you need down the track, and look forward to seeing people at the next couple of risk sessions that'll be coming over coming months. But Anthony, anything else you want to say to finally wind up?
No, just, I suppose, to echo the thanks and all the positive messages coming through on the comment. So thank you, Iain and Darren, for that. There'll be another governance session. The next one will be held on sport integrity, policy and process, and we'll have Landon Rogers helping us out with that one. So keep an eye on some details coming up for that in the next month or two. But I think on that, it might be a good time to wrap it up and say thanks everyone for their time. Thanks for joining us, and please follow up with those additional resources. And best of luck, and certainly chase us up or chase Darren and Iain if anyone requires further assistance.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Lisa.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.